Welcome to the Constitution Quiz Review. We're going to review some major concepts. We're going to start with Chapter 5, Lesson 2 on the Constitutional Convention. So it's going to be helpful for you to get out Chapter 5, Lesson 2 to make sure that you're studying the correct material. Also, feel free to pause this video at any time. We're going to be looking at the Federalist and Anti-Federalist, how we fix the Articles of Confederation, the Great Compromise, the Three-Fifths Compromise. In our next video, we're going to look at the structure of the Constitution, Chapter 5, Lesson 3, including the three branches chart, the preamble and 7 articles, and the amendment process found in Article 5 of the Constitution. In that video, we also will approach the principles of the Constitution from Chapter 5, Lesson 4, and separation of powers, and federalism in federal, which is what we're going to be doing at the end of this week. And we'll have a vocab blast as well as some other reviews. All right, here we go. So we started off by creating a brand new constitution. And we're going to look at why did the American leaders decide to create a new plan instead of just fixing the old ones? What are some of the compromises that they made at the Constitutional Convention? And how did the Federalist and Anti-Federalist viewpoints differ? So we're going to look at this question first from Chapter 5, Lesson 2. Why did the delegates want to write a new plan instead of making changes to the AOC? Well, if you have a document and you have to make so many changes that you can't even see the underlying document, you got to get you have to write a new version of it, just like you would have to do that with, if your rough draft was completely wrong, you'd have to start again. And that's really how they felt. Because it had been a confederal system, remember that the states had all control, and they wanted to change it to a federal system, which would allow states to have a lot of control, but also the national government to share power with the states, which is one of the main flaws of the Articles of Confederation. So let's look at who are the main two groups that emerge out of this time period. So we're going to look first at the Federalists. The Federalists, they were the group that was for the Constitution. They said the Articles of Confederation were too weak. We need a stronger national government that shares power with states. Because they said we needed that in order to survive. And so it was made up of Hamilton, Madison, and Jay, who wrote the Federalist Papers. And so they wanted to make sure that we didn't lose all of the freedoms lost in the American Revolution, but that we wouldn't have a repeat of Shays' Rebellion. That was a real concern. Now, the Anti-Federalists, they were against the Constitution because they said the rights that we won in the Revolutionary War were to have local governments have the most power. That's why they liked a confederal system, because the closer the government was to the people, the more they would know their needs and what each individual community would need. They also believed that because the Constitution didn't have a Bill of Rights, that the federal government would have the national government would have too much power. And that really bothered them. They believed that the federal government should only be strong enough to save the Union. Okay, so let's review that. Let's look at these following statements and determine who would say the statement. If you think it is a Federalist, you should think the word Federalist. If you want to write this down, you can write down F for Federalist and A for Anti-Federalist. Who would have said it? To complain about the Constitution. So let's hear the first one. Number 1. The Constitution gives the federal government enough power to overpower the states. Is that something a Federalist would have said to support the Constitution? Or is it something an Anti-Federalist would have said to complain about the Constitution? All right, so what do you think? That's right, it's going to be the Anti-Federalist. They're very concerned that the federal government will have too much power. Number 2, it will not be possible for the federal government to overpower the states because the states are a necessary part of the federal government. Does that sound supportive or like a complaint? That's right. That's going to be the Federalists supporting the Constitution. Number 3, the Constitution contains no Bill of Rights to protect individual liberties, freedom of speech, trial by jury, and the right against searches and seizures. Sorry, just kept on going. So let's look at that one, okay? Does that sound like a good thing, that it doesn't contain things to protect individual liberties? It certainly doesn't sound very supportive. Does it sound like a complaint? Yes, absolutely. That's the Anti-Federalists. That was their number one complaint, no Bill of Rights. Well, maybe not their number one complaint, but one of the main ones. Number 4, finally. The Constitution said federal laws are the supreme law of the land, so the federal government could just take complete control. Okay, does it sound like support or a complaint? What do you think? That's right. It is the Anti-Federalists complaining and worried about how strong the national government would be. They were worried it would just be like Great Britain all over again. Number 5. Nothing in the Constitution says the federal government has power to limit people's freedoms in the first place. Is that support or a complaint? The Federalists would have said that supporting the Constitution, because they were saying, look, nothing in this Constitution says the government has the power to limit. Right? So they said it's not going to violate your rights because the Constitution doesn't give them power to do that. Okay. Make sure on your Chapter 5, Lesson 2, that you have this correct. All right, so in our Virginia plan, you had a president, you had the courts, and you had Congress. You had 2 houses. However, both of those were based on proportional representation. More people, more reps in Congress. Under the New Jersey plan, however, you had 1 house. Each state got 1 vote. Now, they did give Congress a little bit more power because they said, oh, you can set taxes, you can regulate trade. But the main complaint was basically the AOC. So what did they do in the Great Compromise? Remember, they bring the 2 plans together. So they had 2 houses. And you're going to have the House of Representatives based on the Virginia plan, meaning proportional representation, more people, more reps. And then the Senate. Each state gets 2 reps. So if you look, they bumped it up from 1 vote in the New Jersey plan to everybody gets 2 reps. Hope this helps. And so in this constitutional solution, it's going to solve a lot of problems of the legislative branch, but it also looks at some other problems and structure of government as well, which you learned a lot about that in Chapter 5, Lesson 2. So let's think about it. Do the Articles of Confederation require states to treat other states the same as their own citizens? What do you think? Thumbs up, yes. Thumbs down, no. No, it did not. It did not require that at all. So it's basically like if you're from Massachusetts and you're heading to New York, you're basically going to a different country and will be treated differently that way. So what's the Constitution's solution? Well, the Constitution requires each state to treat citizens of other states the same as it treats its own citizens. And that's going to be really powerful because if you're the United States, it would make sense that you treat your citizens in a united front and in a united way. Another way of saying that, all citizens are treated equally. Think about this one. How many states had to agree in order for the Articles of Confederation to be changed? Let's think about this one. Okay. So thumbs up for all states, thumbs down for a majority. Well, a majority would just be half plus 1. It's not really a specific number. But if you remember, it was really hard to change the articles. And so they required all states. The Constitution solution is going to be a little bit different. Now, this is one of those really challenging things to remember. I do not know why they chose to do it this way, but this is what they decided. the Constitution can be changed if 2/3 of the members of Congress, okay, remember that number 2/3, so that's 67%, right, of the members of Congress. And wouldn't it be easy if they kept it the same? But they don't. You got to have even more states. 3/4 of states, 75% of states have to agree. So this is going to mean that it's still going to be hard. Don't worry, that's just a random bell. Don't go. That's going to mean that you have to get 2/3 of Congress. That's pretty hard. And even more difficult to get 3/4 of the states in order to change the Constitution. Let's think about this. Do the Articles of Confederation require states to follow the laws Congress passed? Thumbs up for yes, thumbs down for no. No, absolutely, they did not. So their solution in the Constitution, they said that the Constitution says that laws passed by Congress are superior or supreme to laws passed by states. We call that the Supremacy Clause. It's very important. It's Part 6 of the Constitution. So, new Americans made compromises and found solutions for their new government. Let's review the final product of the Constitutional Convention. Okay, so under the Constitution, laws are made by the A, executive branch, or B, legislative branch. Give a thumbs up or a thumbs down for which one you think is correct. Okay, good. Legislative branch. Next, under the Constitution, laws passed by Congress are A, superior, that means above, or B, inferior, meaning not as important, to state laws. Thumbs up or thumbs down? That's right, they're superior. Very good. Under the Constitution, Congress has A, one chamber, or B, two chambers. That's right, two chambers. Remember, we have the House of Representatives and the Senate. Speaking of, each state gets 2 votes in the House of Representatives or B in the Senate. That's right, the Senate. If you remember that California gets 2 and Delaware gets 2, how many does Florida get? 2, right? Every state gets 2, so there are a total of 100 senators. Let's look at House of Reps. In the House of Reps, the number of votes each state gets is based on A, population, or B, taxes. That's right, population, right? So you can have California has 53 representatives in the House, and Delaware has 1. Florida has 27. Each one of the states is different based on how many people are in their state. It's about 1 representative per 750,000. How do we fix the Constitution or amend it or change it? Under the Constitution, a change to the Constitution must be approved by A, all the states, or B, 3/4 of the states. You're right, it's B, 3/4 of the states. Great job, guys. Let's go back and review the Virginia Plan, New Jersey Plan, and Great Compromise one more time. Moving on to the 3/5 Compromise. This is a really hard one to be able to wrap our heads around because our founding fathers talked about liberty and freedom so much, but they were also men of their times, and they didn't believe slavery was wrong, or at least they didn't believe it was wrong enough to be able to end slavery. So what happens is that the 3/5 Compromise is called in to resolve the debate between states with few or no slaves and states with many slaves about how do you count slaves when calculating representation in the House of Reps. So what they said is that we're going to settle on 3 non-slaves per every 5 slaves. I know this seems super strange, and it does, because when you try and justify slavery, you just can't. What happened is that if you have a state that has tons of slaves, states that had no slaves didn't think it was fair to count those for their population in the House of Reps, because that would have given them way more representation. The slave states said, well, in order for us to agree to this, you're going to have to give us some representation for our slaves. And so instead of a slave being counted as a whole person, they counted them 3 for every 5. It's a very strange time period in our history. All right, so last thing of this lesson, what are the Federalist Papers and who wrote them? The Federalist Papers were written in order to convince people to ratify the Constitution. So there was a series of essays published in newspapers and spread all over the colonies, and they were written by Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay. And they actually did their job. They convinced the majority of the states to ratify the Constitution and to go into effect. We're going to move on to Chapter 5, Lesson 3 in our next video.